for this session. We have Carine Hales, who is also a co-chair of the Leave a Legacy campaign. You've seen her up front, and here she is, even closer. So you can actually see more about, more about the detail of that necklace. It's really pretty. Carine is a senior plan giving officer at Wayne State University. She's responsible for working with the director of plan giving and leadership from Wayne State's schools and colleges to cultivate, solicit, and steward planned giving donors. That should be familiar territory for most of us. She is an attorney. She got her Bachelor of Arts from U of M, go Blue, and her JD, her Juris Doctorate from Wayne State University. She's a member of the Financial Estate Planning Council of Metro Detroit and a member of the Plan Giving Roundtable of Southeast Michigan. And as I said, she's a co-chair for Leave a Legacy. Rob, is any of this true?
No, none of it is, so you can keep it super short.
Anything Rob says, you can believe what he says, but you can't believe what they write about him. But he's also I do want to say, I'm going to keep it short. You're the past president of the Plan Giving Roundtable of Southeast Michigan. I feel like that's key because that's one of our parent organizations. And a member of the Financial Estate Planning Council of Metro Detroit. You're also a JD, so all the lawyer jokes, they apply for both of you. So good for us.
We're the nice ones.
The good ones. If you would please welcome them, I'd be grateful.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for attending. Carine and I want this to be interactive. I think it works real well when it's interactive. You ask questions throughout. I know that Terry and Eric have some questions for sure, so we've got some plants in the audience. I want to make clear for Randy, who's smiling in the back and is afraid that he's going to be called on. Randy and Jonathan. Randy is with the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan and works very actively with their donor-advised funds. And Jonathan is with the Jewish Federation and is very active with their donor-advised funds. I want to make clear that the reason we're referring to the commercial donor-advised funds is that we see a very big distinction, and I think most of us will see the distinction, but we'll make clear what those distinctions are with the commercial donor-advised funds versus the donor-advised funds that that are being run by the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan and the other community foundations throughout the country, and also the Jewish Federation. So essentially, donor-advised funds, the first ones were created back in the 1930s by community foundations and Jewish federations. They have a great purpose, and the most important thing I want to point out is that a lot of our donors love them, and they should. They make life simple, and the big point that we want to sort of bring forward today is, one, what the differences are for a donor-advised fund when we are, as a nonprofit, when we are the recipient of that donor-advised fund, but also the trends in the growth of the commercial donor-advised funds that are run by Fidelity, JP Morgan, Vanguard, Schwab, and what that is potentially doing to the charitable landscape. So the things that we're going to get into sort of referred to all of those items. We do want to talk about specifically how do you address when your donor says they're going to use a donor-advised fund, how do we address that with our documentation at the nonprofit? And that's going to be consistent whether it's the Federation or Community Foundation, or it's Vanguard or Fidelity. Generally, a donor-advised fund is a charitable entity in and of itself. And so it is a 501c3 corporation, so when someone makes a contribution to, and it is considered a contribution because that is considered the tax-exempt entity, but the commercial entities that we're talking about are actually a charitable organization that has been created by Vanguard or Fidelity as they are the parent corporation still. So although it is a nonprofit, it does have a for-profit charitable organization. But You do get, giving to a donor-advised fund, you do get a full 50% adjusted gross income, as opposed to if you were giving to a family foundation, you're going to get deduction for up to 30% of your adjusted gross income. So that's a significant benefit. And it does make it very simple to set it up in many cases. You can set it up online with, just filling out some basic formats and forms, and you can make your contributions with just a simple form online to be able to do that. There is no additional filing throughout the year. With a family foundation or any foundation, you are going to actually have to file a tax return every year. You're going to pay an attorney to set that thing up. Might be upwards of anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 to establish your family foundation or private foundation. And so there are some significant benefits, and there are currently a lot of private foundations that are just moving their dollars into donor-advised funds because of the simplicity. It's going to cost you a couple $1,000s a year just to file the tax returns on the private foundation, and you've got the restriction that you've got to distribute 5% from the family foundation. You don't have to make, there is no obligation to make a distribution from a donor-advised fund.
So here's just a quick illustration of how it actually works. You have the donor, who you're accustomed to calling the donor, and you have the charitable entity, who is...
Cutting it out?
Yeah.
It's good now.
Okay. Then you have the charitable entity, who is also considered a donor to us. Not very good with technology. Pardon?
When it works.
When it works.
Okay.
Thank you. So so we start with the donor. There is a charitable fund, then there's the charity. In this case, we work for Wayne State University. If we have a donor who wants to give to the university but wants to do it through their donor-advised fund, they're going to make the gift to the fund. The fund then, at a later date, makes the gift to us. So to us, the charity, the fund is our donor for all intents and purposes. When the donor makes their gift to the charitable fund, Fidelity or whoever it is, that's who gives them their tax receipt. That's who coordinates all of that kind of information. And so one of the things that we as gift officers at an organization want to be cognizant about is the relationship that we maintain with the donor. Why? Because, as Rob was saying, the donor has hit the easy button. Everything, you write your check, you give it, you get your receipt, you're good to go. But then here we are as a charity waiting, just waiting for a distribution to be made at some point in time. And so if we're not in touch with our donors, if we're not stewarding them, if we're not taking care of them, there may be opportunities where the donor doesn't make a recommendation, because remember, they can't tell the fund advisor or the fund how to make a distribution, or to, they can't mandate that. They can make a recommendation. The likelihood that the recommendation is followed is probably very high, because these people don't want to lose business from that donor. But that's the second step that has to happen. And if that doesn't happen, the funds just kind of stay there, and stay there. Remember, there's no requirement of a distribution. So us as the charity, we just need to be in touch with the donor, to make sure that that second step is followed through. And the donor-advised funds are good for people who, I don't know where I want to give, I'm not sure what I want to do, but it's December 30th and I got to do something. So they could give the money away to a fund, and they've gotten the benefit that they were looking for that year, but then we need to make sure that we follow up after that to make sure their intent is fully carried out.
I think that's a great point that Carine was talking about. So let's say you realize that, you know, it's December and you've got 200,000, your Apple shares are now worth 200,000, you want to diversify, so you don't want to end up selling and having to take the large capital gain, and so you end up saying, great, I will gift 100,000 of this. Well, do you want to go ahead and, you know, transfer shares of stock to 20 different entities that you use? Or more than likely, your Merrill Lynch broker is going to say, hey, we've got a Merrill Lynch donor advised fund, let's drop it into there, you get the deduction, then come January when things are a little easier, we can make the contributions, you can spread it out to whomever you want. And so that's one of the downsides, is that instead of it coming directly to the archdiocese, you know, it's going to flow through there. We've then, you know, suddenly their charitable intent, they're not thinking, they've just gotten their deduction for 2016, and so they're not thinking, great, I was going to give the archdiocese 30 grand this year, well, but you know what, this thing's growing now. I'll give them 5 this year, and these assets are growing nicely. I love seeing that statement come in, showing me, because it's still got my name on it. It makes me feel like it's my money. And so, you know, there is that issue. And I think, you know, the other side of that issue is that that broker at Merrill Lynch has a strong incentive to keep those dollars in the Merrill Lynch DonorAdvised Fund. So he's currently managing those funds. He's got $100,000, let's say. He's getting 1 point on those, and then he's got them under management for another half point. So he's getting 15 grand off of, or I'm sorry, not on the, he's getting 1,500 bucks on the 100,000, and you're saying you want to send it off to a charity. Well, that's all well and good, because you want to get him the tax deduction, but that's money out of his pocket and out of his firm's pocket. And so what he's thinking is, no, we can keep it here. He'll actually get an increased fee because it's under a trust management situation now. So now his fee has gone from, say, 1.5 to 2 points. So now he's making 2 grand off that. He's got no incentive to push you to increase that contribution to the archdiocese. He's got all the incentive to keep those dollars there. And so that is one of the big concerns that I have with the commercial donor advised funds. And that's very different than community foundation and federation, is that in those cases, they don't have an ulterior motive. There's nobody else getting paid on those dollars. Nice to have those assets in there, because it's nice to see the endowments larger, but there is no incentive for them to stay there. So they're going to encourage distributions because that is their goal, is to help the community in which they operate.
One point I want to add
Yes.
to that is, so for money that has been sitting in a fund like that, when it gets paid over to an institution like ours, we then, it goes into our spending account, but then we then charge a fee, it's an administrative fee for that money. And so now there's another fee being charged on top of that. Even though it's small, it's still more money being taken away from the goal and the intended purpose of the gift. Whereas if the money had come to us directly, a lot of that would have been eliminated.
Okay.
Are you saying that the donors pay 1.5% to 2%?
Well, so when they're at Merrill Lynch, so say your assets are managed at Merrill Lynch, and you've got a fee for services scenario as opposed to brokerage transactions. Generally, you'll be paying between 1 and 1.5%, depending on the dollars under management. And so that is how Merrill Lynch and the broker are being paid. That's the money that they're receiving from you. If they retain those dollars in the Merrill Lynch DonorAdvised Fund, they're then being paid on those dollars continually. However, if the dollars went out and were paid directly to Beaumont Foundation, that guy's no longer getting that $1,500 a year.
You're talking about the same.
And I'm sorry, so, yes,
No.
so to clarify the other fee thing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The fee that the university
Yes,
charges.
exactly.
So once some money comes into our account, we then charge 0.45%, or what is it?
Right, if it goes into our endowments, the assets that come out of the university endowment, and I think many institutions have fees off of their endowments and things, but if it comes out of our endowment dollars, we charge a 0.45% fee, Jonathan.
That's a cut that the university.
Exactly.
Before it distributes it to a school, for example.
Exactly.
But if
Yes.
it came to you outright from DonorAdvised Fund for the scholarship fund at the law school, you don't take it.
Well,
But,
we'll take, yes, we take
Yes.
2%
yeah,
actually.
Expended.
So we do, and that was the point that Carine was getting to, is that, so if it comes from our endowment,
But what if it
we
comes-
take that fee at 0.45, yes, if you pay me directly,
I'm sending
we
you,
set up an
I'm
annual fund.
authorizing my fund to give $1,000 to the, Rob MacGregor Law School Scholarship to be expended this year.
Yep.
The university takes a cut.
The university will take, if it goes into a particular fund, it will take a 2% hit. So
And the
Or,
the school
you know,
said not revoke it.
4 times more than, yeah.
It's not allowed.
Right, yeah, and that is an administrative fee that many universities charge. A lot of other nonprofits probably aren't familiar with that, but it's a fee that the universities in many cases charge in order to cover some of their other expenses.
varies by university.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Yes, Randy?
Is that fee not charged if it comes from somebody's personal checking account? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's going to be, so if it's gonna come into, say, an annual fund, so somebody sets up the Randy Ross scholarship at the law school, and they're gonna just pay in every year, be committed to giving us $5,000 every year, we're gonna tag that with 2%. So it is going to get charged
Sure.
if you wrote the check or your donor advised fund wrote the check.
So the client's better off leaving the money with their broker then, because it's coming out of money?
Well, no,
It doesn't
because
get to the charity.
you're gonna still get tagged. So the real point is, though, so the broker, you're paying, so in the Merrill Lynch situation, I'm sorry, I'll come right back over. But so in the Merrill Lynch situation, you're paying annually, say 1.5% at Merrill Lynch. Then it's gonna come to the university, and we're gonna tag it with 2%. If they put it into our endowment directly, we're only gonna tag it at 0.45%. So, it's a big difference had it been in our endowments as opposed to being in the other account. So, sorry.
Question I have on the donor advised fund, if somebody puts money into Fidelity or Vanguard donor advised fund, okay, and there is, let's say, a 1.5% fee that's charged, it's not the donor that's charging, it's coming out of the 100,000 that's at Vanguard, so you don't get billed to the donor, do you?
Correct. No.
Okay.
So all money management expenses are billed through the accounts. Now, if you're at Vanguard, it's probably gonna be about a 0.45%. It's not gonna be as much as if it's at the Merrill Lynch account. So, all right, so we kind of got sidetracked on the charges that Wayne State charges on other expenses.
It's just a
And,
fee on top of it.
So all of the other contributors to Wayne State, I'll talk to you about that later, but that is somewhat consistent to what occurs at U of M and other places. So, yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure about who the "we" is in all of this, because isn't that just money that's going to a different part of Wayne State? And
Yes.
So it's really just another contribution that's helping to cover a
Exactly.
different set of costs.
Exactly, the money is
So it's all
still
still going to
remaining
the
at the
institution.
university.
So
Yes,
in one sense, it doesn't diminish the total contribution at all.
right,
It's simply a matter of where it's going within the institution.
exactly.
Whereas the brokerage fees are not going to a charity, they're going to a for-profit entity.
That's correct,
Okay,
right, yep.
thank you.
So, one of the big issues with donor advised funds, and the reasons that we're all hearing so much more about them now is that in 1991, Fidelity got the okay to go ahead and operate a commercial donor advised fund. And, you know, so the 60 years prior to that, you only heard about it if you were dealing with a community foundation or federation. But Fidelity got involved in about 2000. Everybody else realized, whoa, there's great money in this because everybody wants to be charitable. You know, it's real easy to kind of attract these dollars here. So at present, we're showing some 2015 numbers. $78 billion is presently, well, as of the end of 2015, it's now at the end of 2016, we're well over $80 billion in donor advised funds. And in 2016, the largest charity in the United States was Fidelity Charitable Fund. So they surpassed United Way. United Way is now the #2 charity in the United States. And can't remember who's #3, but #4 is Schwab. Vanguard is #10. So the top 3 charities, top in the top 10, 3 in the top 10 are donor advised funds that have no charitable mission in and of themselves. So that to me is a big concern. And so we were actually, you know, at one point, I was just going to say, you know, I was thinking, okay, you know, is this really a donor or a zero-sum game in the beginning? And so I know Craig Ruck just referenced that charitable contributions in 2016 were up 2%. The previous year they were up 4%. Donor advised funds are up 20% year over year. So when that happens, for 2016, just as an example, United Way, the #2 charity in the United States, was down 16%. Vanguard was up 20%, Fidelity up 20% in their contributions, and Schwab was up 16%. Jonathan?
If my numbers are correct, I think that was DAS distributed $15 billion this year out. So while there is the argument that they're warehousing dollars, when you think about 15 of the 80 going out, I don't know. I mean, you know, that's a pretty stunning number.
Yes, and so, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I add one thing to that. So, which is the point I was waiting to make. We see grant payout rates averaging 20.7% for the year. Okay. What we don't know is where the money comes from. So that's an average. We don't know that money is coming out of every fund. Right. So it's not. So they can take the bulk of the money from a really big fund, report that as a distribution, and say, hey, we're giving out money. We're good. We're great, right? But it doesn't always add up that way if you look at each individual fund, because each one may not be paying out. So again, you need to, if you're concerned about your money going to do something good or going to do what you want it to do, that's where the concern comes.
And for 2016, and I'm sorry, you guys are next, but for 2016, just directly to that question, the largest beneficiary of donor advised fund dollars was Fidelity Charitable in 2016. So as we look at that 20% payout or the $15 billion, a lot of it was money that just funneled back in that, as we talked about, having the succession plan, in many cases that succession plan is, well, we're going to just create another donor advised fund at Fidelity or wherever, and it's just rolling the dollars back in. One of the #2, it was another donor advised fund in a for-profit entity. So, I'm sorry, Allie, you had a question.
Yeah, I'm curious if you know offhand the number, the average payout rates for private or family foundations, and how
7% on average. Yep.
I just wondered, in the numbers for the commercial donor advised funds, do those also include in institutions like JP Morgan going to a charity and holding, having that charity, I'm with Henry Ford Health System, the charity holding, out this perception that they have their own donor advised funds, but JP Morgan is holding the monies?
That could be, and I can't be certain. So I am assuming, because it's probably all under the charitable entity of the JP Morgan umbrella, because they wouldn't establish separate funds, it would be subsets.
I just wondered, you don't do that currently?
Depends on who owns the dollars. It's all a matter of the gift instrument. So
Can
JP
you
Morgan,
speak up just a little?
so JP Morgan could administer funds on behalf of a charity, but if the charity owns the dollars, it's going to count on their financials. I mean, you can't be double counting
I
numbers.
gotcha, okay.
No, but I guess what I was thinking, Randy, is similar to, say, if somebody else does the administration or
It
actually
depends on the gift
runs the.
instrument. It really depends on the gift instrument.
Yeah. But I know entities are offering to do these things for charities that aren't as large, but that is actually a far smaller subset than just the growth of these entities individually. Eric, you got a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, candidly, do you use EAFs as an incentive for giving, realizing there's this caveat of maybe putting the money in and distributing it somewhere else? The donor typically is going to do what the donor's going to do. They have their heart, it's all about heart. But it becomes an avenue for opening up hearts, perhaps, that there is this flexibility. You said at the beginning, it's a donor delight or the donor desire to have this flexibility and ease of use and that sort of thing. But you find it as fundraisers, as an incentive to incentivize gifts, good gifts. It's a tool you use to try and loosen the gift. And the reason I ask that question is because there's a creative element to this when you have your own donor advised funds.
We do not have
Have you thought about that from the standpoint institutionally? And here's the breakdown. So you have your existing programs, or you have opportunities for establishing perhaps an educational chair. Is it something that you would like to see done? That the donor could open a donor advised fund in Wayne, okay, and watch and work with the administration, which gives you better interaction, okay, with the donor, for being creative in the distribution internally of those funds that they've already identified, set aside, irrevocably placed within your organization. It gives them a kind of a cool relationship with you and you with them, in that sense.
Well, my first answer is, we are not the powers that be.
I guess it's a suggestion in a way.
Yes, it is, and certainly, I don't know what the philosophy or thinking has been in terms of using our own donor advised fund, so I can't answer to that. Rob might know a little bit more. But to answer the first part of your question, it's not something that I typically use to incentivize a gift or a donor. Most of the time, the donor, is calling me, and I had this call last week where the donor calls and says, "Hey, I'm leaving Wayne State money in my will, and I'm doing it through Donor Advised Fund." So, they come to me with that. And that kind of leads into a little bit of, well, what do we say when that happens, right? And of course, you're going to say thank you for your kind consideration of the person. But so we still want to capture that somehow, right? So we can ask the donor, and this is what I did. I talked to her and explained, trying to ask her if she was really set in her position, explain to her the benefits of giving directly, through her will to us, that what we could steward it probably. And then I asked her to, if she would sign a letter of intent to memorialize that, because that we can use. The one thing I can't remember if Rob had mentioned is when someone is giving through a donor advised fund, they can't do it and say that it's going towards an existing pledge, because doing that gives them a benefit, and they are not entitled to any benefits once they make this gift, give the money away, put it in the fund. They should not be able to benefit personally from that. So a gift that pays off the pledge is a no-no. So that's why we use the letter of intent. They can say, I intend to give through my estate X amount of dollars. That's the, there's no commitment language associated with that. We then are able to capture that for our records and for those gift officers who will be here, after all of us are gone. And if we get gifts, partial gifts or intermittent gifts, we can book that then. So that's also part of our conversation here, and the title of why MGOs or gift officers don't like the donor advised funds as much, because in a campaign and you're trying to count money, you can't count that money until it comes in. But you at least want to have some indication of what might be coming in. You can count it as an important expense.
So we just had a situation where one of your donors pledged, wanted to pledge philanthropic fund dollars or advised fund dollars on a multi-year pledge to set up a scholarship fund at Wayne. And he, of course, just did it. And we said, no, you can't do it. We need to redraft that. We won't sign it. We need to redraft the agreement. So what we do, just for your benefit, is that we actually, as the owner of the donor advised fund, take a suggestion from the donor that we consider a multi-year pledge out of that philanthropic fund. We are the donor in the big coin, promising to pay over the course of 5 years. We then reserve out of that fund, kind of build a wall around those assets, because they're assets that more or less pledged. But the pledge agreement is with the donor advised fund, not the donor. So we stay in the shoes of the donor. So if your lady has a donor advised fund with us, we will enter into that agreement, and then you can go instead of
Okay, which is a great alternative. So did everybody hear, I know Jonathan's far point, so did everybody, okay. So basically, what he's saying for the Jewish Federation, they had a situation where someone said, I want to give to XYZ scholarship, or I have pledged to XYZ scholarship, but it's going to come from my donor advised fund here. And Jonathan had to tell them, no, you can't do that. Legally, there can be no personal benefit from a charitable gift that you make, and that includes to a donor advised fund. And the gift from the donor advised fund, you cannot control that any longer, so you cannot receive personal benefit from that. So if it's tickets to a gala, you can't use the donor advised fund to pay it, or if it's to pay a pledge, which is your personal obligation, you can't use that to pay it. But, so Carine's point is, so that as gift officers, geez, that really hurts, because we're all, graded on the dollars we're bringing in the door or the pledges that we get committed. And Jonathan was saying one thing that they will do, as Community Foundation has done for other donors of ours, is that when you make the arrangements with them well enough in advance, then the pledge can be made from the Federation or Community Foundation, and it would then, in the case of the Community Foundation, there's a pledge that is from that fund signed by Miriam Nolan, saying that they will make these payments over this period of time. And that allows us to then book that as a true pledge. And we just have to know to go back to steward that other individual. But in the other case, and what Carine was talking about is the idea that, so if we're going to be able to document something, it has to just be documented as an intent, because we can't use language of commit or pledge, because there can be no legal obligation. Terry?
I don't really know the answer to this, but somewhat in the nature of a bequest. Occasionally we get a donor to offer us a letter that is a letter to his donor advised fund saying that we're the beneficiary of the donor advised fund on his demise. Purely revocable. And it's somewhat in the nature of a bequest. Plus there's the issue of a successor advisor, where they can change their mind. Some of these donor advised funds are even funded life insurance. So that
But it depends on everybody's different recognition policies and gift policies as to whether your organization would credit that, because there are a lot of potential contingencies in there. Randy?
Well, in that situation, are we allowing the donor advised fund to maybe throw a wrench in there that maybe we wouldn't in other situations? Because how is it any different than a revocable bequest intention? You know, we're worried about the source of the money as opposed to the actual structure of how the gift is, whether or not it's revocable and whatnot. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think donor advised funds scare people because they don't quite understand them, or they seem mystical, or we hear these big numbers, but really they're not all that complicated.
No, I said it was the easy button.
Yeah.
But in the instance that you just described, I do know of that. I do know of that with Wayne State, with both the foundations. I don't know of an instance with a commercial donor advised fund where that has happened. I don't think we've had that experience.
Right. No, I've not seen that. You know, but so just as we talk about the pledges and or how you book something for your organization, we had a situation where we had an individual who was wanted to establish a scholarship, full ride scholarship at the med school, and so roughly $32,000 a year, and his Merrill Lynch brokers suggested that this would be best done through a donor advised fund, and we tried to explain that it would really be best in our endowments, one, so that we could make sure we fully document it. And there are always ways to document otherwise, but we would have preferred that it come directly through our endowments rather than through the Merrill Lynch funds, because it will remain with Merrill Lynch then for X number of years, 20, 30 years. And the gift officer, instead of being able to book a $1.2 million, well, a dramatically larger gift, we were only able to book a gift because the individual did go ahead and sign something saying that, I will pay this from, I intend to pay this from my donor advised fund, but roughly all we were able to do was the stream of funds for that donor's life expectancy, because even though he insisted that his kids are going to continue, that they are the remainder trustees on that, but there's no saying, because there was no obligation on them to go forward. So we ended up booking a $350,000 gift as opposed to a $3 million gift or something. I mean, that's the painful part for a gift officer and for the organization and for a campaign when you're looking at it. But obviously the key is that the funds will come, but the fact that the additional funds are remaining in Merrill Lynch for that period of time, there are large fees being accepted too, so, and money that's not going to the ultimate good.
And I think earlier, for those of you who were here for the first plenary session, Marguerite really took the wind out of our sails. She gave away that golden nugget tidbit of information about making your organization the beneficiary, the major beneficiary, asking the donor advised fund to do that. I think that is a great idea because that gets overlooked a lot of times. And so it's a good opportunity to capture funds that may otherwise go somewhere else. I believe, Randy, if there's no designation, it stays with the community foundation. If the gift was made through your.
Every fund that's set up has a designation when it's set up. So.
But I believe in the commercial annuities, and I've got to pull this up, I believe that I had read that something like 90% don't have a final residual beneficiary. And in those cases, I know that back when I was an investment advisor, basically it stays with the trustees of that fund to then make those determinations. Now, you're not so concerned when it's community foundation or Jewish Federation because you know that it's going to follow generally what is expected within that community. But you don't know what the advisors of Fidelity are going to do, or whether those assets will ever get distributed, because again, there is no incentive for them to distribute.
They will, they'll just be in Boston if it's Fidelity.
Right, yes, yes. Yes. Yeah. Other questions or thoughts? And we just got our list of terms and other things here, just all a part of those handouts. Again, just sort of distinguishing the differences between the community foundations and other things. But
I'm actually a little curious. I want to know how many you out there have donor advised funds. Yes, at your own organization. Let's take that first. Okay. And then that you have set up for someone else to manage. Your community foundation or somewhere else. Anyone? Just curious.
And are you starting to see more and more gifts coming in and checks coming in from donor advised funds? I know that both here and former organization, there often isn't any discussion because the donors think of it as their checkbook. And so you will just suddenly receive the check and it's payment on a pledge. And we all end up signing the receipt saying this is not paying a pledge or any other obligation. And so while there is no great obligation on the recipient entity, the obligation really all falls on the distributing entity. But I know that they are also becoming far more rigid. I had a situation with, this was actually with Vanguard, where they wanted to see any agreements that we had with those donors, and they did a very thorough check on what was happening. So, we had to send through all of our written documentation and had to sign an affidavit that there was no personal benefit being received and that this was not paying a pledge by any means in their case. Jonathan?
Well, they're getting a lot of pressure. There's been a series of articles on the front page of the
Yeah.
Wall Street Journal talking about the lax enforcement of the commercials.
Yes.
But we provide, whenever we send a check out, because we honestly don't know. If somebody says send $500 to Wayne, we send it, assuming that it's just annual gift.
Right.
But our checks say, dear Wayne, by cashing this check, you're certifying that this is not paying a pledge or providing a direct benefit to the donor, because, yes, the donor has already gotten a charitable deduction for these monies, and PPS, do not send them a receipt. Okay? Now, I gotta tell you, more than I care to admit, recipient charity issues a receipt and sends it to the donor.
Yeah.
That's a
Big,
source
it's a
of,
big mistake.
well,
We can't control what you do, except we have this disclaimer language that says, by cashing this check, you're agreeing A, B, C, D, and E. So you do have some responsibility to read and follow that.
Yes.
Because we don't know, and the donor isn't telling us.
Yes.
and a lot of times the donor doesn't know, because we've gotten the calls from the donor who says, hey, I had the check sent, where's my receipt? And we have to say, we are not the,
You're not the donor.
Right, and so,
We need to send an acknowledgement, but not a.
right, right.
Terry?
The other thing is that you don't know whether your pledge is enforceable or not. I mean, unless it's clearly, plain language, non-binding, because considering reliance on a charity on pledge, could be by law, binding, whether you're going to enforce it or not. So there you have a binding obligation that's being satisfied with the advisor. The construction, pledge might actually be enforceable contract.
Exactly, and so that's why it's always so helpful in advance to have that discussion, so that instead of using, basically what I do in all of those documents is you take out the word pledge and commit, and you put in intent and intend, and then you're okay. But, you know, in most cases, you don't learn about the use or, you know, what they're doing with the funds until, or how they're gonna pay it until after the fact. And, it was interesting, I've seen board members who are actually board members of a donor-advised fund who should certainly know better, generally sending their checks to pay for an event from their donor-advised fund. And you know, if anybody should know better, but it's just human nature. People just think, well, this is my checkbook, I'm just going to do this.
And nobody will ever find out.
Right, and nobody will ever
That's
know.
the answer.
And, but it becomes tougher and tougher, and so the charity doesn't want to be the bad guy and say, no, we're not using this check, you got to write us another check. This one's just going to go to our general operating, so thanks for that. But send us another $2,000 if you want to eat dinner that night. So, you know, it's tough. And then the other side of it is too, you know, as we're talking about the recognition side of things. Our fund offices, you know, especially if you don't have a large, sophisticated organization, and we don't, one person receives a check from a donor-advised fund, and they say, oh, great, we got another check from Fidelity. This is so great. And nothing shows up on your donor's record as, you know, at least a soft credit, so that we can acknowledge that person. And then there are those other scenarios where it, you know, it goes out where we send a tax receipt. So it's getting more and more difficult, and it requires education throughout the entire organization, because we assume, okay, so if we talk to the gift officers all understand, but the gift officers aren't the ones always receiving the checks and dealing with the day-to-day activities. John?
So I'd like to.
Come on up.
I'd like to ask a question of the Community Foundation, which is, how are you dealing with bifurcation out of donor-advised funds? So let's say there's an event.
I sat in the back so that I wouldn't be part of the presentation.
We're bringing you in.
So you got $100 meal cost, it says so on the thing, and $400 of a deductible cost. Will you allow that $400 to be paid from the
No,
VA?
the IRS will not allow it. So it's not our rule, it's the IRS rule. So, you know, really, organizations that are thinking about gala events ought to think about a way to say, here's a sponsor opportunity, here's a way to buy a ticket separately, and not mix the two together, because otherwise the IRS I mean, there are fees that are, and penalties from the IRS that would potentially eliminate, you know, our entire donor advised fund program, and that would not be good for any of their donors. So we don't want to risk it over a chicken dinner. And I've had plenty of our donor advisors, they've learned now if they're supporting sponsorship of an event, and we look at the organization's website and it says an event at this sponsorship level includes this number of tickets, they'll say, I just want to be a sponsor, we're not going to the event, we're not giving our tickets to anybody else. And so in those cases we do it, but it's really a slippery slope. And, at some point, maybe there will be greater clarification. The challenge might be that if people are so afraid or concerned about donor advised funds and the commercials in particular, that we may end up with some regulation and things that will make it much more challenging. So if you go on a per fund payout basis, or if you end up implementing private foundation rules on donor advised funds, you may actually squelch some of the giving that happens from donor advised funds. So the big concerns that there are about donor advised funds, I think, are more because people don't know it and they don't see the insides of it. The remedies could cause more problems than they would solve.
Although if they require a 5% minimum payout, actually you might get more money coming out of the fund.
I think it could create a floor. I think it would actually hinder giving.
There you
have it each side.
Yeah.
It's hard to know, because it's hand in hand.
Right,
Right.
right. So,
And certainly people aren't so afraid that they're not putting money in right now, because the dollars are just going through the roof. And, yes.
Is there a restriction from a donor advised fund making a contribution to another donor advised fund?
No, as a matter of fact, that's what I was saying, that the number one recipient of donor advised dollars happens to be Fidelity Donor Advised Fund. So
Yeah, but
contributing.
But they're getting fresh dollars, aren't they? They're not getting dollars from other
Those are
donor advised
those
funds.
are funds from other donor advised funds. No, those are, so distributions from all donor advised funds aggregated in excess of $5,000, because they don't, the difficulty is that it's very difficult to track the data from commercial donor advised funds. But the largest recipient of funds from donor advised funds is Fidelity Charitable.
so it's coming from another donor advised fund.
Is that because they perceive Fidelity will manage that money better, or there are more options at Fidelity than there would be at the community foundation?
I don't know, and I don't know that it's coming from a community foundation or if it's coming from one fund at Fidelity to suddenly now move some dollars over to another fund in Johnny's name so that you can continue, so you don't worry about that issue of the fund expiring. You know, the intent is that these things should have essentially two lifetimes. The difference in a private foundation is that it can go on forever. But there are many ways. There is no limit. You can make your contribution to any charitable entity, so therefore you can distribute that out. I think an awful lot of foundations, private foundations, are also moving into donor advised funds because it's a lot cheaper to operate and easier to operate.
So they're not the bane of our existence. We love them. Our donors love them. We just need to know what they entail and really know how to respond appropriately to our donors and really steward our donors because they're not going away and people aren't going to stop giving to them. So we better get on board. And I think in the end it's going to be very positive for us. It's positive now. So we just have to understand the limitations and the rules so that our donors don't get into trouble, our organizations don't get into trouble.
Do you have a publication that explains just briefly to your donor what the caviar problem is with pledge using DonorAdvised Funds for? I mean, that would be helpful, I think, to them, so you don't have to be necessarily the bad guy, it's already in print, you know, and you're legally jeopardized when you do that. I've never seen this with any organization. You have it, Jonathan? Explain to the donor about the problem with using DonorAdvised Funds to meet pledge. I mean, that's confusing.
Well, you could essentially just, print out that section of the IRS.
You could do that, you may
Right.
more should have funded that.
Yeah. I don't know, Craig Ruck said that, it's nothing more fun to look at.
I've had a couple donors tell me that their Fidelity reps in particular have told them, well, as long as it's not legally enforceable as a pledge payment, then you can skirt it.
Well, there you go.
Okay.
So that kind of, and we're sitting here
That's
saying,
dirty.
but we do know the rules and you really
Right.
shouldn't.
Right, we don't want to be the ones to do that.
Right. we don't wanna be
Use
the
intention
ones-
instead of pledge, and it eliminates a lot of problems.
Yeah, yeah.
There was one more hand.
I was just gonna say the same thing, when I worked with a couple people, they already knew that, they told me, I'm gonna tell you that I'm gonna commit to a 5-year pledge, but it's gonna come in annually as to a donor advised fund, so we would recognize them, we had to make a note, we had to remember that kind of thing, but they were very clear, we cannot make this a pledge,
Yeah.
and you can look.
Yeah, that's great, and I'm sure that, even the commercial donor advised funds are educating better now, because they know that they're under scrutiny, but to be honest, I mean, again, it's, why are these things proliferating? Because who's got the money? Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, they've got the marketing dollars to build these things up. So yes, they're convenient for us, but the reality is, are they going to be under stricter scrutiny? Who has the control? JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon, Do they have better control of Congress, or do we, as nonprofits? Taking the skeptical side of this, I'm saying that there probably isn't going to be much more regulation on this, and that they will continue to operate, because that's where the dollars are. They've got the money to spend on lobbying, and they've got the money to spend to do things. And they're not a bad thing, but we need to be aware that we've got to keep actively talking to our donors, no matter how their funds are coming in, and make sure that they are continually being reminded. As I had mentioned earlier, you know, when you're getting this statement, now it starts to feel like, you know, we all feel wealthier when we see our 401k statements come in, even though we know we're not going to use that money for quite some time. Same thing, you know, now you're still getting a statement on your Vanguard Donor-Advised Fund, and you know you put 100 grand in there, and now it's worth 130. Well, you kind of like that thing running up, and you know, it's not as fun to write that check for $30,000 to Duke, and you know, when you can kind of let that keep running up. So there's a disincentive emotionally to people.